What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. My name is Adam Palmer. I am your host. This is the Hobby News Daily Morning Minute. Today is Monday, July 14th. And on today's episode of the podcast, we are going to be talking about Prism Baseball and we're going to be talking about the Club World Cup. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to remind you that we are about 16 to 15 days, depending on when you're watching this, away from the National. And for the next couple weeks leading up to it, I'm going to try and give a tip a day. So here's the first one. So the first one is going to be start walking now. Start getting in your steps. Try and do 10K steps a day. I mean, that's what I'm going to be doing leading up to the National. There's going to be a ton of walking. So if there's one thing that if you're watching this right now, depending on when you are, start exercising, start getting your legs moving now before it's too late, because honestly, there's going to be a lot of walking around at the National this year and every year. The first topic we're going to talk about today is going to be a baseball product that is not Topps. It is Panini Prism Baseball. And what I saw from Panini Prism Baseball, the previews that I saw, it was a combination of the pro basket or pro baseball and also college baseball. And this is sort of, it seems like what Panini's MO is going to be for the future of their company, at least until they sort of lose some of the licenses. And I actually think that Panini dropped the ball pretty hard on college products. They had like a 2 mile head start when it came to the deals that they had with college players, the ability, the infrastructure, all of the things that Panini had before Topps came into the fold with, or Topps and Fanatics, before they came into the fold with their NIL contracts. Panini had a ton of stuff in place, and I think that they just dropped the ball. I think that they could have set up, they could have been building these products maybe beforehand. And I obviously don't know the licensing. That's maybe one of the big things. I don't know the licensing that they had. Maybe the college licensing they couldn't use until these players were pro, but at the same time, they still had the licensing. So and it was maybe a timing of the products that was the reason why Panini couldn't really focus on college products, because if when they had to come out with players that had been drafted, obviously I think that makes it a little bit tougher to come out with college products before the players are in the league or they are, like I said, drafted. So maybe that is why they dropped the ball, but it's like at some point they must have known that NIL was coming, or they should have, I don't know, stepped up and started focusing more on college. I just think that like they had such a huge head start. Panini had such a huge head start on college products versus Topps that I don't know why they weren't the leaders when it came to their college products, or when NIL came out. Like, I don't know why immediately they didn't focus in on figuring out how to become the biggest NIL college producer in sports cards, because I think once Bowman was announced, that's when Panini should have been like, oh wow, Topps is really taking this seriously, because Topps's brands, Bowman is their biggest brand. And that is the reason why I'm a little upset that Panini hasn't focused more on college cards, because in my opinion, I think Panini has they in my opinion, Panini has a stronger brand presence with individual brands. Like Topps has Flagship and they have Bowman and they have a couple other big brands. But like I would say like Donruss, Optic, Prism, National Treasures, their individual product branding, I think is much better. And that is why I think that they dropped the ball here, because if they had taken a little bit more seriously, I think that they could have been the number one player in this game. So it is unfortunate, I think, that they didn't focus on these things. There are going to be there's one interesting player that I know plays for NC State, that plays in the Cape League right now, actually. He's a Japanese player. He decided to go to college instead of playing in Japan, so that way he can go pro. He has like the most college, or no, he has the most high school home runs in Japanese history, and he plays for NC State, now plays for Katuitt in the Cape League, I believe. So that should be an interesting card if that one does come out. The other topic that we have for today's podcast is going to be the Club World Cup has finalized. Chelsea beat PSG 3-0. PSG had allowed like 1 or 2 goals the whole tournament, and then they allowed two in the first half, and then I'm going on to lose. Um, it was basically, I mean, for the most part, it was just a dry run for the World Cup. Like they didn't do all of the stadiums. Like I don't think the Gillette Stadium where they're having some of the World Cup games had any games. But it was just a dry run to get everybody ready. Preseason almost, you could say. Like that is really, I think, one of the real reasons preseason still exists in the NFL is because they still the people who are working at the stadiums, they also need to get ready for the games. Like they're obviously professionals or whatever, but they still need a dry run. So the Club World Cup, I'm not going to sit here and say it was a dud because I think that the final game was pretty interesting. Like Chelsea PSG, that's a pretty good matchup. But like the finale was on TBS. Like it wasn't on any of the major networks, or even you couldn't even watch it if you didn't have like if you have basic cable, you probably couldn't watch the game. So for me, it wasn't necessarily a flop. Like there were some interesting storylines that came out. Unfortunately, there was a big injury for one of the Liverpool players when they were playing in Atlanta, which that's one thing I am a little bit nervous about with the US stadiums, which I have heard that they are bringing in the actual grass that they use at the other stadiums, like not the football stadiums. Football in Europe, soccer. They're bringing in, or they're changing out the turf for this grass field, which obviously I think is a really good idea. Um, you didn't really see any of the big names, and also the one thing I was kind of nervous about with the Club World Cup was that there's just too many games. Like Chelsea, for example, like they play in all of these tournaments, and I think honestly that is one of the reasons why sports cards have not taken off as much as I think they could with soccer is because it's just a little bit too complicated. There's too many cups, there's too many trophies. Now, you might sit here and say, well, that's a good thing that they have all of these trophies because it gives all, there's always feels like there's something to watch. But I think when it comes to a sports card perspective, if you're looking at people who are sports fans in American sports, the seasons are pretty cut and dry. You have the regular season, you got the playoffs, and that leads to the champion. In soccer, you've got tons of different tournaments. You've got countries playing. You've got tournaments. You've got the regular season, which for the regular season, the winner is just whoever has the most points in most leagues. So that's definitely a lot different than I think a lot of sports in America. They have relegation, which I think is something that should be adopted in American sports. If I'm going to be honest. Like you look at the MLB and you look at teams like the Rockies, and you're just like, we're not even like. It feels like if you watch the Yankees, you're not even watching. It feels like you're not even watching the same sport. So I think the nuances of soccer may end up being why soccer didn't take off as much because again, it was a sport that I thought was actually going to explode. And I think maybe the other reason is probably the US men's national team is not they're not as good as I sort of expected they would be leading into this World Cup. Now they're going to not have like they just lost to Mexico. I think it was in the CONCACAF Gold Cup. They are not going to have the qualifying, which I think leads to a lot of excitement around the team. Because since the U.S. is hosting the World Cup, they just automatically qualify. There's not going to be any qualifying, so maybe people are not excited for that. The team is sort of feels like they're not all on the same page. It feels like they have a lot of talent, but they haven't been able to figure out how to bring all the talent together and actually play like as a cohesive unit, which I feel like other sports maybe or other countries, that's maybe more of what they have. So that could be another reason why I think the US hasn't exactly been able to or not or sports cards. That's another reason why I think sports cards hasn't been able to get into soccer as much as I realistically think they should have because it's an interesting sport. And maybe that is another reason, or maybe one of the reasons why, with the nuances, I think to add on to that, there are so many different leagues, there's so many different games, there's always stuff to watch. And so maybe the anticipation isn't as much like for the regular season for basketball or any other sports. Then there's an off season where they don't play for a long time. So that could also be another reason. But to me, I still see soccer as a sport in sports cards that could be an interesting one to look into because although the US men's national team is not as good as I kind of hope that they would be, like with the World Cup coming up next summer, they are still, if there's one thing that I know, it's that whenever there is American sports, like for example, the hockey tournament that happened over the winter, people didn't really think that was going to be a big tournament at all, and it turned out to be one of the more exciting tournaments we've seen in quite some time. So when there are American sports, people will rally around those American players in the sport, and especially when you're going to be able to see them in the United States at some point. Depending on where they're going to play, they obviously haven't done the seeding and all that, so we don't know where the men's national team is going to play. But I think that is one thing that I know about soccer, or one thing I know about sports in general. When the USA, and it could be even the Olympic basketball, when USA is playing, there is a rally around those players that I think does not happen in other types of competition. Maybe is how I want to kind of picture, or kind of how I want to word it. So although I think that soccer has not taken the steps that it needs to, I still think that there are reasons why I see soccer being an important sport in sports cards as we're leading into the World Cup next summer.